That well has always been on my land. Then explain why the survey pin says otherwise.
The morning Dale Pruitt told me to get off his property or he'd have me arrested for trespassing at my own water pump. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I pulled my phone out of my shirt pocket, opened the photo I had taken the night before, and held it up so he could see it clearly. It was a photograph of a rusted iron survey pin, still stamped, still readable, sitting 6 inches inside my property line. Dale squinted at it. His attorney, who had driven out specifically to witness what Dale had described as a straightforward confrontation, went very quiet. Dale's wife stood behind him on the porch with her arms crossed. 3 of their adult neighbors had gathered along the fence line to watch. I said to Dale, calmly and without any particular satisfaction, that I needed him to explain to me, and to the county assessor's office, and to my attorney, and to the title company currently reviewing 11 years of payment records, exactly how a well sitting on my surveyed land had been collecting monthly fees from me since 2012. Nobody said anything for a long moment. That is where this story ends. But to understand why that photograph meant what it meant, you need to know where it started. My name is Calvin Mercer. I am 53 years old. I grew up on a 40-acre parcel in a rural part of central Tennessee that my grandfather bought in 1961, worked as a dairy operation for 2 decades, and eventually left to my father, who left it to me when he passed away in 2009. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a surveyor. I am an electrician by trade who has spent most of his adult life fixing other people's wiring and spending his weekends on land that has belonged to my family for over 60 years. The well in question sits near the northeast corner of my property. My grandfather drilled it in 1974. My father maintained it. I have maintained it since I inherited the place. It supplies water to a small equipment shed, a livestock watering station I use for the 6 head of cattle I keep, and a secondary line that runs to a rental cabin I lease to seasonal hunters in the fall. That well has been functioning, documented, and insured under my name since the day I signed the inheritance paperwork. Dale Pruitt bought the adjoining parcel to the east in 2011. His land borders mine along a fence row that runs roughly north to south for about 800 feet. He is not a bad neighbor in the ordinary sense. He does not play loud music. He does not let his animals wander. For the first several months after he moved in, we had the usual cordial exchanges over the fence, how the summer was shaping up, whether the creek at the south end ran high in spring, small talk between 2 men who had no particular reason to like or dislike each other. The first conversation about the well happened in the spring of 2012. Dale came over on a Saturday afternoon and mentioned casually that he had been looking at his property survey from the closing and thought the well might be sitting inside his boundary line rather than mine. He said it with the easy confidence of a man who had not yet been told no. I told him I had always understood the well to be on my land, that my grandfather had drilled it on my grandfather's property, and that I was not particularly worried about it. Dale nodded and left. 2 weeks later, he came back with a photocopied plat map and pointed to a dotted line that he claimed showed the property boundary running just west of the well. I looked at the map. It was not a certified survey. It was a reproduction of a general subdivision plat, the kind of document that gives approximate shapes of parcels but is not a legal boundary determination. I told him so. Dale said his closing attorney had confirmed it and that he was willing to work something out rather than force the issue. I told him again I was not worried. The well was on my land. What I did not do, and this is the thing I have thought about many times since, was immediately hire a licensed surveyor to place fresh monuments and certify the boundary in writing. I was busy. I had contracts running. I had been managing a grieving estate for 3 years and had not yet finished organizing every document my father had left behind. I believed I was right, and I let that belief substitute for the paperwork that would have proved it. That gap is what Dale Pruitt walked through. By June of 2012, he had sent me a certified letter from an attorney I had never heard of, informing me that the well encroached on his property by approximately 4 feet, that he was willing to grant me a use license in exchange for a monthly access fee, and that if I declined, he intended to file a boundary claim with the county. The letter was formal and it was specific, and it arrived on a Tuesday when I had 3 crews on 3 different job sites and a rental cabin that needed new flooring before deer season. I made a mistake that haunts me to this day. I paid the fee. Not because I believed him. Because the number was small enough that fighting it felt like more trouble than it was worth at the time. $65 a month. Less than a tank of diesel. I paid for it for 11 years. For the first few years, the arrangement sat in the background of my life the way an old ache does. Present, dull, easy to ignore when other things demanded attention. I paid the monthly fee through an automatic bank transfer Dale's attorney had set up, and Dale and I exchanged maybe a dozen words a year over the fence line. He had built a small weekend house on his parcel and came out most Fridays from the city. He was polite in the way that people who believe they have already won something tend to be polite. In 2019, the fee went up. Dale sent another letter, same attorney, same firm, informing me that the use license was being adjusted to $120 per month, citing increased property valuations in the county and what the letter described as market rate adjustments for rural water access rights. I called the attorney's office and spoke to a paralegal who read the relevant clause back to me. The agreement I had signed in 2012 permitted annual adjustments tied to county property assessments. I had not read that clause carefully when I signed. I had not had my own attorney review it. I was 43 years old and running a business and settling an estate, and I had signed a document I should have examined more carefully. I paid the new rate. The second increase came in 2022. $190 a month. And this time, Dale's attorney's letter included something new, a proposed amendment to the use license that would convert the arrangement from a revocable license into a permanent recorded encumbrance against my property title. In plain terms, Dale was trying to make the access fee a permanent fixture in the county records, which would have followed the land forever and made it visible to any future buyer or lender who pulled my title report. That letter is what woke me up. I drove to the county courthouse the following week. I asked the records clerk to pull every document associated with my parcel number going back to my grandfather's original purchase. I sat at a reader table for 4 hours. What I found in that file was not dramatic. There was no smoking gun immediately visible. But there was something that had not been there the last time I had looked, or rather, something I had never looked for carefully enough. In the original 1974 drilling permit for the well, my grandfather had provided a hand-drawn site sketch showing the well's location relative to the property corners. It was rough. It was not a certified survey. But the distances he had noted, 42 feet south of the northeast corner stake, 17 feet west of the east boundary line, placed the well clearly and unambiguously inside my parcel, not Dale's. I took photographs of every page and drove home. My neighbor Harlan Dodd, who has farmed the parcel to my south for 30 years and who has more institutional memory about this corner of the county than anyone I know, came over for coffee the following Sunday. I showed him the sketch. Harlan looked at it for a long time, then told me something I had not known. He said that when Dale's parcel was originally subdivided off a larger tract in the 1990s, a survey had been performed, and the surveyor at the time had placed iron pins at all 4 corners of the newly created parcel. He said he remembered watching the survey crew work that week because his own fence line ran close to the south end of the action. He said he was fairly certain those pins were still in the ground somewhere, overgrown or buried, but present. I hired Margaret Ellison, a licensed land surveyor, the following Monday. Margaret and her field crew spent 2 days on the northeast corner of my property. They worked from the original 1961 deed, the 1974 drilling permit sketch, the county's GIS data, and the subdivision plat from the 1990s. On the second afternoon, Margaret called me out to a spot roughly 30 feet inside a stand of cedar trees that had grown up along the fence line over the decades. She pointed to the ground. Beneath a mat of cedar duff and roughly 2 inches of compacted soil, her crew had located an iron survey pin. It was rusted. It was bent slightly at the top where a tree root had pushed against it. But the stamped identification number was still legible, and it matched the pin record from the 1990s subdivision survey exactly. Margaret measured from that pin to the well using calibrated equipment. The well sat 11 feet, 4 inches inside my property line. Not 4 feet inside Dale's. 11 feet inside mine. I stood in those cedar trees for a while without saying anything. Margaret gave me the space. She had seen this kind of moment before. Then she told me, in her careful professional way, that she would need another day to complete the full boundary certification and that once it was filed, the recorded survey would supersede any general plat interpretation anyone had used to support a different conclusion. I drove home and called my attorney, a property lawyer named Frank Tully who had handled my father's estate and who I had not spoken to in 2 years. When I explained the situation, Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do not pay next month's fee. Do not send any notice. Do not call Dale. Let me look at the 2012 agreement first." I did exactly what Frank told me. Frank Tully reviewed the 2012 use license agreement over the following week. He read it the way attorneys read documents when they are looking for the weight-bearing walls, slowly, repeatedly, with a yellow legal pad filling up beside him. When he called me back, his voice had the particular flatness of someone who has found exactly what they were looking for and is choosing their words carefully. The agreement, Frank explained, had been written as a license for access to a well located on Dale Pruitt's property. That was the foundational premise the entire document rested on. Not an easement. Not a shared use arrangement. A license premised on Dale's ownership of the underlying land. If the land had never belonged to Dale, if Margaret's certified survey confirmed what the original pins already showed, then the agreement had been built on a false factual claim from the first day I signed it. A use license for property the licensor does not own is not a valid use license. It is a document that collected money under a premise that was not true. Frank also noted that the proposed amendment Dale's attorney had sent in 2022, the one attempting to record a permanent encumbrance against my title, had never been signed by me. I had not responded to it at all, which meant it had no legal effect. The recorded title to my property remained clean. Margaret filed the certified boundary survey with the county the following Thursday. It became part of the permanent public record. The well's location, 11 feet 4 inches inside my legal parcel, was now a documented, filed, verified fact that anyone could pull from the county records with a parcel number and 5 minutes at the clerk's window. Frank sent Dale's attorney a formal letter the next day. It was not threatening in tone. It was methodical. It attached the certified survey. It cited the 2012 agreement's foundational premise. It noted the documented 11-year payment history totaling just under $17,000. It asked the attorney to review the survey and advise his client accordingly, and it indicated that if no substantive response was received within 15 business days, Frank would be filing a claim for recovery of all fees paid under a use license that had been issued without a valid ownership basis. I want to stop here for just a moment, because if you've ever been quietly overcharged, slowly pressured, or made to feel like standing up for yourself was more trouble than it was worth, you know exactly what it felt like to finally have that letter sent. If you're the kind of person who believes property rights mean something, that a deed and a survey pin and a recorded document are worth more than whoever talks the loudest, this channel is for you. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened when Dale's attorney actually read that survey is the part of this story I have been waiting to tell you. Dale's attorney called Frank 4 days later. The call lasted 40 minutes. Frank told me afterward that the attorney's position had shifted considerably from his earlier correspondence. He was no longer asserting that the well sat on Dale's land. He was not prepared to concede the full 11-year recovery claim either, but the foundational argument, that Dale had owned the land the license covered, was gone from the conversation entirely. The attorney asked whether my client would consider a negotiated resolution. Frank told him we would consider a complete one. I drove out to the property that weekend. I walked the boundary Margaret had certified and I stood at the northeast corner pin, the one that had been sitting under cedar duff for 30 years, bent slightly by a tree root, stamped with a number that matched a 1990s survey record nobody had bothered to locate. I thought about my grandfather drilling that well in 1974. I thought about my father maintaining it. I thought about 11 years of automatic bank transfers leaving my account every month for access to water that had been mine the entire time. Dale's attorney sent a written settlement proposal the following week. It offered to terminate the use license and waive future fees in exchange for a full release of any recovery claim. Frank read it to me over the phone with the practiced neutrality of someone who already knew what the answer would be. I told him no. We were not releasing the recovery claim. We were not accepting a termination of a license that had no valid basis in the first place. What we wanted was a full accounting of every payment made, a formal recorded release of the purported license from my title, restoration of any documentation Dale's attorney had submitted to the county that referenced the access arrangement, and reimbursement of my legal and survey costs. Dale showed up at my property 2 days later without calling ahead. He came alone that time. No attorney. No wife on the porch. He pulled up in his truck and walked to where I was working on the equipment shed, and he stood there for a moment with his hands in his pockets before he said anything. He told me he had not known the survey was wrong. He said he had relied on the plat his closing attorney had shown him at the time of purchase and genuinely believed the well was inside his boundary. He said he had never intended to take anything from me. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, I told him that I believed he might be telling the truth about what he had been shown at his closing. I also told him that what he genuinely believed had been true was no longer the relevant question. The relevant question was what the county records showed, what a licensed surveyor had now certified, and what 11 years of payment records documented. What he intended and what had happened were two different things, and it was the second one that required resolution. Dale asked me what I wanted. I told him to talk to his attorney. Frank and Dale's attorney reached a negotiated settlement over the following 6 weeks. The terms were practical rather than punitive. Dale agreed to pay back 9 years of the collected fees, not the full 11, because Frank had advised me that the first 2 years presented a murkier picture given the state of the documentation at the time, and I was not interested in fighting over the edges when the center was already solid. That figure came to approximately $13,400. Dale also agreed to cover Margaret's survey costs and Frank's legal fees associated with the recovery claim. His attorney filed a formal recorded release of the 2012 use license with the county, which cleared the reference from my title history entirely. And Dale signed a written acknowledgement, not recorded publicly, but notarized and held by Frank, confirming that the well and the land surrounding it had always been my property. The county assessor's office received a copy of Margaret's certified survey automatically when it was filed, and a title officer at the company that had insured Dale's purchase reached out to Frank independently after reviewing the new boundary record. That conversation was between them and Dale, not me, and Frank advised me not to inquire further into it. I took his advice. The practical changes on the ground were quiet but permanent. Margaret's crew reset a new survey monument at the northeast corner to replace the old bent pin, set in concrete this time, stamped and recorded. The fence line between my property and Dale's was adjusted by a contractor over 2 days in late October, moving it to reflect the certified boundary rather than the rough approximation that had stood for years. Dale watched from his side of the line without comment. I did not make conversation. By the time the contractor finished, the well sat where it had always legally sat, clearly, measurably, documentably inside my parcel, with a fresh white monument stake visible from 50 feet. The automatic bank transfer that had been leaving my account on the 15th of every month since 2012 was canceled the same week Frank filed the settlement documents. 11 years is a long time to pay for something you already own. I'm not going to pretend the settlement erased that. It did not. But I also am not someone who carries things forward as grudges when they have been properly resolved. Dale and I do not speak at the fence the way we once did, but we are not enemies. He maintains his property. I maintain mine. The well pumps the same water it has always pumped, and the cattle use it, and the hunters in the fall cabin use it, and I have not thought about a monthly fee in more than a year. What I think about when I think about any of this at all is the iron pin, bent slightly by a tree root, buried under 30 years of cedar duff, sitting exactly where a survey crew placed it in the early 1990s, carrying a stamped number that matched a recorded document nobody had bothered to retrieve. That pin did not move. It did not argue. It did not negotiate. It simply waited in the ground until someone finally looked for it. My grandfather drilled that well 50 years ago on land he owned. A piece of steel set by a county surveyor 3 decades ago confirmed it. And a rusted stamp on an iron rod turned out to be worth more than 11 years of certified letters, legal language, and automatic bank transfers combined. The lesson, if there is one, is not complicated. Know where your lines are. Find your pins. Read your documents before you sign them. And when someone tells you with great confidence that something belongs to them, make them show you the survey.